All right, Techno Studs, one thing that's really important is for you to be able to identify what physically the ports are to what in the operating system when you're going through the different ports, what you're seeing, what you're viewing. So let's just talk a little bit about how the two are associated. We're going to talk about identifying interfaces on your device. So on your device, it actually has a lot of physical interfaces, but also virtual interfaces. We're going to talk a little bit about the difference between the two, not real in depth, but we're going to get an overview of that. And then we're going to talk about how do you address each port that you have on your switch. So one of the things that we've talked about in the past before is the difference between copper, fiber, and wireless, things that are going through the air. And so copper and fiber are two of those physical interfaces that connect into the switch. So we're primarily going to be talking about copper in this case. And there's still a lot of different types of connectors when it comes to copper. There's a lot of RJ45 connectors, and there's just a lot of different type of serial connectors that are out there. There's a wide range of connectors, but the thing that we're going to be working with most in this class is Ethernet connections. So I'm going to go through how those Ethernet connections look and how to associate each port with what it looks like in the operating system. I, however, want to just call out there are a lot of virtual interfaces as well. And we're going to have to figure out how we address each of those virtual interfaces as well. So just a few examples here. We've got the VTY connection, which is when we're making a connection into a device so we can control it and program it. We've got a switch virtual interface. This is associated with VLANs, and when we have a virtual interface associated with a VLAN, we've got loopback addresses. The loopback addresses are generally used for testing, but there's a lot of other things that we can do with those loopback addresses as well. We have sub-interfaces. This is when we have a physical connection into a router or a switch, and that physical connection though has lots of VLANs that are being passed across it, and it's a routed interface. And so we'll talk more about those sub-interfaces and what those look like. We also have a null interface. The null interface is where we're going to send traffic if we want it to kill that traffic. We've got port channels. Port channels are when we group up multiple physical interfaces into a grouping, so that way we have a connection and we can use multiple interfaces to have more bandwidth across from one switch to another. So we're going to take a look at that. And then we also have tunnels, and tunnels are going to be when we have two devices that are physically connected to each other, but then we're going to tunnel traffic, specific traffic across there. And a lot of times that's encrypted traffic that we're tunneling across there. So more to do with all of those, but I just wanted to call that out, that there is a different way that you address each one of these interfaces, just like there's a different way to address a physical interface. All right, so what does this look like? So right now I've got my computer plugged into a Catalyst 2960. So we're going to take a look at what a 2960 looks like. If you look at this, we have 48 ports. Each one of those ports are labeled. So we've got the first port right here, the second port right here, the third port, fourth port, and each one of those ports are labeled on this machine, all the way up to port 48. And then we have these connectors right here. These are actually just a single connector. So there's two of these. It might look like there's four, but one of them is if you want to connect via Ethernet, and one of them is if you want to slide in a GBIC to give it some sort of extra connection, extra functionality. Maybe you're connecting fiber between these switches. Maybe you have a long run between these switches, and so you want some sort of media that's going to go a longer distance. So I would slide a GBIC into here, which then I would connect a fiber in here and run a fiber off between the different switches. So these are gigabit connections here, while these other ones are fast Ethernet or 100 megabits per second. And so let's take a look at what that looks like now on that switch. So we're going to jump onto the switch and see what it looks like. For this particular command, we have to be in the privilege exec mode. So I'm going to type in enable here and get into the privilege exec mode. And I'm going to do a show IP interface brief. And then I hit it, and it's actually showing us a lot of different interfaces that are on this device. And so I'm scrolling through all of this. Now, let's just take a look at this. So if I scroll up, I can see right here at the top, the first one that shows up, the first interface that shows up is actually VLAN 1. And so that's one of those virtual interfaces or a switched virtual interface, an SVI, that's showing up in here. So that's a virtual interface that's showing up in this list. And then the next one we see here is Fast Ethernet 01. And then Fast Ethernet 02. And so we've got some sort of labeling here, 01, 02, 03. That second digit, the 1, 2, 3, 4, is associated with that interface that I showed you a second ago. So that is how I know which interface is associated with which one that I'm seeing on this iOS here. I'm going to scroll down and I see Giga Ethernet 01 and 02. And those are the two extra that I showed you on the end. That could be either a GBIC that you slide in there for something like a fiber, or it could be just the RJ45 copper end to it that you plug into there. But these are the Giga Ethernet. So that's operating at a gigabit per second versus these others are operating at 100 megabits per second. So just one note about this little, this first 0 right here. The reason for that is that a lot of times we have several modules that can slide into these devices. And so when you have like add-on devices that you slide into here, then the next one would be 1. So if I've got the regular switch maybe has 48 ports, but maybe I slide a little interface in and it gives it an extra 4 ports, then then you would see the first 48 ports would be 0/1 through 0/48, where that little extra would be 1/1, 1/2. So it designates like a separate little backplane that's slid in, or it's not a backplane, but a separate little card that's slid in for that additional functionality. We don't see that on this switch because these are actually two different speeds. So one's called Giga Ethernet and one's called Fast Ethernet. But if these were the same speeds, then these would be, let's say it's all Giga Ethernet. So then these would be Giga Ethernet 01 through 048, and then these would be these extra with the GBICs that slide in would be Giga Ethernet 1-1 and 1-2. But because they are separate speeds, and then we see that it actually just calls it Giga Ethernet 0/1. So let me give you another example. Here we have a 3750, and the 3750 has all these ports. It still has 48 ports that are along here, but we see a separate little section right here. So let's say these are all operating at Giga Ethernet speeds, and so we would address all of these as 0/1, 0/2, 0/3, and it would be this first one. It's usually the upper most left one is the first port, and the second port is right below that. Third port is then just to the right of the first port, and so on and so forth. So generally that's the way these are laid out. And then if I were to slide an extra card in here that gives an extra 4 or 8 ports, then that's where we'd see a 1/1 or 1/2. and so on and so forth, labeling those. So these, so I use this as an example, number one, because we can clearly see where there's a spot here to slide in some additional functionality or some additional ports to this. But I also bring this up because these are switches that have the Stackwise. They have a connection in the back, which will connect the back plane, and then these will operate all as one switch. You program one switch, and it's actually programming all the switches. And so we actually add another element to this also. There's actually a whole nother slash in here. So this would be 001, 002, 003, and this is identifying the switch in there. So it will identify the switch in there. So as we connect these together, then it'd be 101, the next one would be 201, 301. So this is identifying the equipment that it's connected into. This is identifying which of the components within the switch it's connected to, and then this is identifying the specific port. So let's take a look at what the 3750s are going to look like and those interfaces on the iOS. So I'm going to type in my command, the show IP interface brief. I'll hit enter, and now it's going to scroll through here. I see the same VLAN 1. I have a fast Ethernet connection to this. And here's where I get into what's a little different here is there's 3 numbers here. Remember that first one designates the switches. So in this case, with the Stackwise, it will start from 1 and count up. Although if you have like a router and there's several little modules that can slide into there, I've seen this start as 0 as well. So in this case right here with the Stackwise though, this identifies the switch and it starts with the number 1. And then this second number right here then identifies the module that it's a part of. So these are all part of those initial 48 ports. So that's 0. And then we have a 1 right here designating the port that it's on. And this is going to count up from 1 to all the way to 48. So let's continue to scroll down through here and see what else they have. On this particular switch, here's an example of the switch where it has a module, and then it has some sort of additional functionality that's installed in there, and it's got 4 ports to that. And then it has this connection right here, and then we get into the second switch here. So we see a 2 at the beginning of this, and then the first module here, and then we have the port number here. So I'm going to scroll through the rest of this, and it goes all the way up to 48. And then we see that same numbering here. So these are connected together using the Stackwise connection. Just so that you have a visual of what's going on here, here's the Stackwise. There's these connectors here on the bottom that's connected directly into the backplane, and you connect from one to the other. In fact, you see here is a connection. There's 2 connections for each one of these. So you would probably have another one that would connect these 2 in case one of these fails. It would then still be connected. Or what I've done is you have a stack of maybe 7 of these together, and they're all daisy chained together. So you would have one connected into this one, and then this one connected into the next switch, and this switch connected into the next switch. So you'd have all the way down, and the last switch would come in and plug into this one. So you have full redundancy amongst all of those switches. You could have a single switch fail, and you would still have all the rest of the switches would be up and running. Okay, so there you have it. We covered the identifying these interfaces from the physical interfaces. We talked about the virtual interfaces and what some of the virtual interfaces are. We talked about addressing specific ports on there, and I showed you then those specific ports that we'll be addressing. So it's important to know the association between the two because we're going to be plugging in switches and other devices into these devices, and we'll want to know what port we are plugging that into so we can identify it on the iOS. Thanks for watching my video. If you liked it, could you hit that like button?